Break out the brooms or break the brooms. Either way, the Brooklyn Nets got swept on their home court, ending their postseason run at the hands of the Boston Celtics. We're going to talk about Kevin Durant getting on track just a moment too late, Kyrie Irving making his offseason plans a little bit early, and all of the things that happened inside of this game that do feel like the culmination of one disappointing, depressing season for Brooklyn Nets fans. But we'll do it all right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, friends, it's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator, DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings, DraftKings, FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast, getting ready for the NFL Draft later this week. We thank you for making our first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms. And Doug, the season is over. Brooklyn
is it
swept at home. Might as well have been
what
4
happened?
games sooner. Could something happened? I blacked out. I wasn't available. Again, man, like I continue to be a little bit, I think, in that mode of the fan blood boiling inside of me. Everything about this game ended up, I think, being symbolic of this season in a lot of ways. But yeah, season over, just like we thought it would be, swept in the first round.
Only team swept out of the first round, first team to go out of the playoffs. It really couldn't have ended any other way. It's hard to imagine it ending another way based on just how the whole season has gone. It was nice to sort of dream at times on certain things happening that would fall in the Nets' favor, or that the Nets helping themselves at some point. Neither thing ended up happening for basically the entirety of the whole season, right? So nothing went their way, and they didn't help themselves at all. So it's just a double
double down.
It's just a double bottom line of just, nothing can really work. And it was an exciting game. We'll talk about the game. I think there's plenty to just still talk about here. In terms of just straight hoops, I had fun watching the game until the final buzzer sounded, for the most part, right? There was some adjustments here. We got some KD stuff. I think there's plenty to kind of dive into. But in terms of the whole season, I'm not surprised. We kind of saw this coming. The writing was basically on the wall. The team, it was just going to be an incredible difficulty to dig themselves out of this hole that they had kind of dug for themselves in some ways. And, the Celtics played great too. And it ends. You can hear it in my voice. We're going to come at you 5 days a week and still talking Nets basketball. I'm excited. We have tons to talk about, but I'm not shocked that this is the way it ended.
No, and you say Kevin Durant's performance, Kyrie, Steve Nash, and what he did, some of the role performances that you got out of this one. But I do wonder. I don't wonder. I guess I kind of know it now. And I think maybe we on the podcast kept convincing ourselves, in spite of things that could be indications of struggles, of things that were going to be speed bumps, of why it was going to be hard for them to, even regardless of how deep they were going to go, get out of a first round series against a very well coached, balanced team like Boston. It kept coming back to, well, you got two superstars. You have the two superstars, and every time that you got a big performance out of one or both of them down the stretch of the regular season or getting through the playing games, you kept saying, yeah, there you go. This is all you need to see happen to think that they can get out of the first round. They can have a deep run. But I think the thing we'd look back and be reflective on, which we talked about at the time, was, well, boy, you keep blowing big leads against bad teams, or you really needed a Herculean effort to get yourself out of the playing game and secure your spot as the 7th seed. And those should have been examined on a deeper level of, this is why you're not going to beat a well-balanced playoff team, as opposed to, now that you're here, we could accomplish anything.
Yeah, this whole season for the Nets has basically been propped up on the idea of hope. Not a lot of things to be hopeful about, but lots of things to be hopeful about that most of them did not come to fruition, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the story of this whole season was just this never-ending litany of things that just felt just out of your grasp, right? Or just out of the fandom's grasp, the team's grasp, and it was all so close. It was like, if basically the whole season was, if this just can happen,
Yeah.
then it'll be okay. And there's just a million examples of it, right? Like if the vaccine mandate's lifted, if Kyrie gets the vaccine, if Harden just plays himself into shape, if he can just get over the injury, if they can get Kevin Durant back, if
Joe Harris can come back,
if Joe Harris is on the timeline once they get him back, if Kevin Durant can come back healthy, if they can get Ben Simmons on the court, all this stuff just sits right on the outside where it's like the whole entire season, there was always something you could look to that could just happen within a few days. If you can just wait a few days, we're going to get there. It was like 9 months of that. Yep. or whatever it was. And it was just the whole story of the season. And now that it's finally over, when you look back, and I kind of just thought of this as you were saying it, when you look back, it does feel ridiculous to continue to have all that hope because, yeah, of course, it was never going to happen. Like the savior was never coming here. The thing was just never going to happen. It was just the whole story of the season. It was just never going to happen. And until the very last whistle blows and you just run out of time and the series is over.
And for every if that you mentioned, which was in optimism or what could happen, there was
by the way, I probably missed like 5 things in there.
Oh, of course there. Yeah, naturally. If Kevin Durant doesn't get hurt and miss 20 games, right, if he comes back sooner from that timeline,
if we could just get him back, right? Like whatever, all these different things.
But for every if, there was a triple but this is what ended up happening. But
yes.
when you thought X was going to happen, there was another circumstance that came in right in behind it to derail things. And I think you're right about, we mentioned when we talked with John Carolus, who idiot got this one wrong, 5 games, egg on his face. Am I right, friends? But when we talked to him about it, we said, coming in, they were 28-6, I think, down the stretch of the season for Boston. It's like, that's the kind of thing that if you're covering a team 5 days a week, like John does with the Celtics, you see the steady and methodical growth into this opportunity. Yeah. Whereas on our side of it, it was all the steady and persistent efforts to wait for things to finally come together. And listen, do some teams overcome obstacles along the way? Of course they do. But by and large, it is the teams that face less difficulties throughout the season just from an injury. And I'm not leaning on continuity and all that kind of stuff necessarily, but just teams that have a gentle road often end up being the healthiest, the ones that got to play the most minutes together, the ones that are the most rested, all of those factors that do matter for deep playoff runs, which means nothing relative to the idea of at least getting out of one series or out of 4 games.
100%. Like all this lack of continuity over the whole entire season cost the Nets, and they just never got a full realization on all the things we're waiting for, right? Like Ben Simmons doesn't play. James Harden just can't, they can't convince, or even if they tried, I don't even know if they did, can't convince Harden to stay, right? They were never able to do any of the stuff either. It was, get the vaccine mandate lifted. Yeah, it just like came too late, basically, right? And it just, or Kyrie never, got the vaccine, whatever side of the aisle you stand on, that doesn't matter now, because we're already well past it. But it was just that nothing ever, all the hope, really none of it ever came. And none of it ever came to fruition, right? So, and the difference, like, that's a good comparison with Boston that you make, because Boston is one of these things. It's like, okay, they stay relatively healthy, but that their consistency helps them kind of figure it all out as the season goes on. And then we see the culmination of that in this series, where it looks like they're completely put together. They have so much confidence, right? Like they can start smelling blood in the water. And because they know exactly what they're trying to do. They have a system that they know the exact system they want to run. They have the exact connectivity that you need around this time in the playoffs, both offensively and defensively. They have a hierarchy of who's supposed to kind of do what on the team. Like it's a very clear, totally clear hierarchy in this team. Yeah. And on the Boston team, by the way. And they're just, that's just like total opposite. Are they pound for pound more talented than the Nets? I mean, probably, but it's not by some huge margin.
Not to the tune of a 4-game sweep, right?
Yeah, and each of these games were pretty much close too, right? So it wasn't like they ever blew them out. It was just these little. For the Nets, the season was just a death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? And that's what I mean. You can't even look at just one thing. It's just 1,000 things, and then you end up bleeding out. And Boston goes the other way, and it just really is the story of 2 different teams.
And ultimately, we say it's the end of the Brooklyn Nets season, but this is also now the end of a 3-year, that's what I feel like it is too. It's the weight of 3 years of expectation. You've only won 1 playoff series since you've accumulated all this massive talent and the money and everything else that goes along with it. And that's where I think every single series, every single game, every single season, it just compounds either the frustration or the difficulties, and it also starts to dial up the opacity on the excuses or explanations why things haven't gone correctly. So listen, they lose the series. That's what it comes down to. They get swept. It's obviously disappointing, and we're going to get into a lot of the other details from this game specifically because in only true Nets fashion, we also got a lot of other maybe answers out of this, or at least more things to consider as we move towards the offseason.
All right, we're going to talk about Kevin Durant here. Obviously, need to pay him some time because for what he did on the court. Talk a little Kyrie Irving as well. Talk of some Nash adjustments from what we saw in Game 4, still relative to how the team looks to move forward. And before we do that, I'm going to talk to you about our friends over at Prize Picks. NBA fans, the season's still trucking along here with Prize Picks. You have to go over there because Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. I love Prize Picks. You will too. All you do. Super easy. All you do is pick 2 to 5 players. You go the over under on their projections. That can be points, steals, rebounds, assists, blocks, anything in there. You pile it all together, and you can go 10x on it, or 10 times on any entry. And it's just you versus the projected numbers. If you've been doing daily fantasy, you know that sometimes trying to run into those guys or gals that have hundreds or thousands of lineups, it can be really, really hard. That's not the case with Prize Picks. They're making it easier on you. It's just go over under on the projected stats, and you can win. Prize Picks allows you to mix sports up as well, so you can put NBA and MLB together if you want to. For a limited time, Prize Picks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our users. Users get $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point. That's pretty easy. But you must use the code NBA. That's right. Exclusive offer available for Locked On fans. Sign up today and use the code NBA. $50 free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy.
All right, so we turn our attention into this one, and where we finally got what we had been waiting for, a well-coached Boston team. Threw a lot of things at Kevin Durant, but Kevin Durant finally plays like KD, like one of the best basketball players in the game. I'm not going to label it as too little, too late, because it's never not worth the effort. But did anything feel dramatically different for you in how Kevin Durant approached this game to have some level of success in what was a 116-112 loss for the Brooklyn Nets, as opposed to a theme that I think extends beyond him, but effort, energy, focus, desire? I know those are things that you kind of scoff back at, rightfully so, around these guys all want to win, but it did look different tonight than it did in the first 3 games.
Yeah, look, the energy was there. The effort was there. You can't be mad about that part of from the team. I don't think that you're not going to look at this situation and say, oh, they just didn't try in the last game. I mean, that's clearly not the case. I think there was very clear differences with KD's game, even right from the jump. The decisiveness was much clearer on his part. Like, he was getting into actions much earlier. There was, it wasn't allowing them to, he got into shots, even some tougher ones, which I was okay with because he was able to do it before they were able to bring doubles. Yep. We saw him a couple times run left on like sort of a floating shot, like a floating sort of near the baseline shot. He did it twice within his first 3 shots of this game. I was totally happy with those because at his size, even against physical defenders, he is able to shoot over almost anybody. His problem is really in the series was not on the shot. It was actually getting into the shots. Right. And so, losing the ball, getting stripped of the ball, getting doubles or getting tangled.
Create the space.
Yeah, there was nothing there for him. So there was clearly at the beginning of this game for him, whether it was by design or just it was probably by design. It was like, hey, when you get the ball, there needs to be movement right away and a rise and fire very quickly. And I think that they basically stuck to that in a way that it just ended up being his best line, right? 39 points and 31 shots. He didn't shoot that well from 3. Few of those were in transition, but you'll live with it. So I thought he played a very different game that was trying to mitigate what Boston was doing against him, which was bottling him up so much and causing these causing him not able to shoot, right? Like losing the ball, having to pass out of it, all this stuff. Then I think they just said, let's go. And one more thing with that too, it was very clear that there was an edict here in this game that helped him, which was on a miss on the off chance they can get a rebound, was they had to push the pace. Like it was get out in transition as much as possible because this is our only chance. So I think there were things that were happening here. Yeah, but with KD, I think it was like you saw that, right? It was very clear, like, hey, we're not gonna have time. We're not gonna bring you can't bring the double as fast because I'm going to be decisive basically the second I get the ball.
No, that's what I called for coming out of game one, was just saying, listen, you can see what Boston's going to try to do to you. You can understand that sometimes you should be able to just overcome that or beat it, or you should be able to scheme out of it. We're going to talk about Steve Nash a little bit later, but part of it was on the opportunities. You said, when you have the chance, get out and transition quickly, get out and put Kevin Durant in space. And then he needed to. It was double down. It's not just about do it quickly. Then he had to, which is against his normal style. He settles into his offensive rhythm. He takes on the defender one-on-one and then rises up and uses his size. When you have the double teams coming over at you and you have all 5 guys for Boston paying attention to you, you just got to go. And whether it is getting to the baseline for the fadeaway jumpers, when it's trying to get into the mid-range, inside the paint, whatever it was going to look like, you had to be committed to it. And I thought the other thing, this may be a little bit of strategy as well, but they did a good job giving Kevin Durant looks where he was not the first guy to touch the ball, and it ended up coming to him on the third touch. And all of a sudden, just because of spacing and timing, he found himself with easier looks, and he was willing to pull the trigger on those. The ones I don't like, not that it's mostly praise here. I'm glad that he had a performance like this. 31 shots, right? 31 shots, had 11.
Good.
He eclipsed.
If you're going to lose, if you're going to lose, sorry to cut you off.
No.
If you're going to lose, make sure that Kevin Durant took 2 times as many shots as everybody else for the most part.
Yep.
I think, right. And that's silly basketball, and that's not like high IQ stuff or whatever, but at least if it had been another 11 shots or whatever he took, and that would have just felt, if you're going to lose anyway, just have it be where he takes the most shots.
Right. Might as well have one of your, might as well the best player take the most looks. And the other, if I'm going to be, let's be balanced about it, I guess you mentioned the 3 for 11, the triples in transition. I think those are the opportunities where, again, got to stay downhill, got to keep attacking. It's the kind of game where you need to go inside out. So it's hard. It was a physical series for him all the way through, but 11, I think it's 11 from beyond the arc, 3 of 11. So, you take 31 shots, more than a third of them come from deep. For Kevin Durant's game, I'd rather you keep pushing and keep attacking with it. It's hard to, only 4 turnovers, mostly all solid, positive stuff from him. Like, to your point, more than anything, I was just happy to see Kevin Durant show that he's capable of this thing, which we all know he is, because without it, getting swept and then also walking away thinking, I mean, geez, like, is Kevin Durant, just from a playoff basketball standpoint, going to get repeatedly faced with these type of matchups and issues where, this is the blueprint. He at least showcased that he can overcome that and force the team to have to make adjustments.
Yeah, 100%. And I totally agree with all that. And then it's just unfortunate because in the old, they can't put it all together. You get finally a performance where he's put the pressure on the defense to a requisite degree, and they kind of just don't get enough from anybody else, right? Like, Kyrie looked completely checked out at times during this game.
For every if, there's a but.
And there was a few times where he looked very vintage Kyrie. I'm just blowing by guys on the dribble, going to the left-hand finish, finishing in traffic. And then it would just kind of disappear again. And I thought that it was just... it's not like the microscope is always going to be on him because he's good. So I get that part of it. But this game, it just looked like, I hate to say
you can't be Kyrie Irving. We said it about Kevin Durant. I'm going to say about Kyrie Irving. You can't take, in this game, you had 20 points. That's fine. You can't take only 13 shots in an elimination game and only have 5 assists. Like, by the way, the eye test tells you everything about this superstar.
Okay, I'm gonna revert off one of my points here, because I think both of our points. At some point, there's just no more shots to take, right? Like, Kevin Durant took 40% of the whole of all the shots on the team. So at that point, if there's just 80 shots to have, or 81 shots to have, and KD takes 31, it's not like Kyrie can also take 31, because it's just not how it's going to work. I mean, if you look at the shot distribution, really no one else shot. It was sort of less about that. So I'm agreeing with you. But I mean,
the impact on the game, you have to impact the game at a superstar level, and that's where you're right. It's not about the number of shots or the points or whatever. It's just the total impact. You said it. I think it was game number 2. I'm saying in game number 4, there's stretches where you go, oh, Kyrie's playing. That can never be the case when you're one of the 2-3 best players in the series, right? That's the problem.
So it's more about it, right? So it's only to clarify, it's more about that, right? It's like it's not passing the eye test on this. And we're gonna save this for a little bit later, but I'm just gonna say it now because it's relevant. There's a moment that totally summed up sort of what I thought what we both thought and many other people thought was this lack of energy on him. And it's at the end of the first half. There's 1.3 seconds left on the clock, and they go to inbound, and he just gets the inbound and walks. You're losing by 8 or whatever it is at that point, and he just walks off the court. And I get that like NBA players don't like to heave shots at the end of these things because it nicks their field goal percentage, which, by the way, is like the dumbest thing in the entire world. It drives me completely crazy. If you watch enough basketball during the year, this is not a new thing. It's an every game thing. It's disgusting. Every team does it. Every guy does it. For some reason, it's become a thing. It's totally okay. I hate it. It's like you have a chance to score. Guys don't want their field goal percentage to tick down by 1/100th of a percentage point or whatever. Yep. But in a must-win playoff game where you have 1.5 seconds left and you can just take a dribble and heave it, and it's probably not going to go in, but it would sure help if it did. Like, to just get that ball and walk off the court was egregious. And so I feel I usually wouldn't bring that up because honestly, most NBA players do it. So it's just become, like I said, it's become a thing anymore.
The only thing I'll say is no. To your point, different guys at different levels of status in the NBA will approach that play differently. He didn't take the pass leading himself up the court. He took it literally facing back towards the baseline. Ryan Ruocco questioned it on the broadcast, and then Richard Jefferson, who's an former NBA player, he called it unacceptable in an elimination game down 0-3 with 1.5 seconds. Heave the thing. Yeah, whatever it is, the microscopic chance it goes in, guess what? Might be the difference at the back end of this thing. And it's more about the attitude and the approach, the disengagement from what's happening.
And like I said, I get that every NBA player does it. I think I'm on the record here. I know I've said it. I've thought it a gajillion times. I absolutely hate it. And I really would never bring it up for any situation, except that I just thought it really embodied what was happening, which was like, right, there's just doesn't seem to be this giddy up and go here around this particular game. So I thought if there was anything that embodied it, it was that play, and he just wasn't good enough, I guess. The numbers look okay, right? Mm-hmm. Like 6 for 13 from the field, 6 for 6 from the line, 20 points, 45 minutes. Okay. Like KD took 31 shots, so there's not going to be that many more shots to have. But if just from an offensive facilitation thing, you needed a little bit more. You didn't get it. And these two guys were just never able to put games together in the series. That's the other problem too. It was just never able to double up on this stuff. And that's going to be impossible for this Nets team. If they're not going to both have good games at the same time, it really, against a team like Boston, the Nets just weren't going to be able to win.
And let me, and I'll cap it off on this on one last point around these two superstars. We talked so much about continuity and the changing pieces, the trade, and everybody else comes in, they got to figure it out. But you know who two guys that are supposed to be as close as anybody on and off the court? It's Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. So the fact that they were unable to come together and find a way to have quality games off of one another, like that's one thing that maybe we didn't talk about this series. It just registered in my mind of where's the two-man game between your two best players where they go, listen, you guys be in the spaces, give us some room. We get it. But I'm going to help set up Kevin Durant. I'm going to do what's necessary to make it easier for him. He's going to do what's necessary to make it easier for me. What we have said, and everyone has said over the course of the season is, you take a possession, I take a possession, right? I take a game, you take a game. That's the difference, too, about having two superstars or two high-level talents on your roster. It's supposed to be that both guys benefit greatly from one another, and there's a disconnect there between these two guys, and this game was also indicative of that.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about this. We're going to talk some of the adjustments that we saw that Nash did in this game. Some interesting stuff. I mean, finally, I don't know how much longer Nash is going to be on the bench for the team, but did see some moves in this one. First, going to talk to you about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all betting stats and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, news, including this year's basketball playoffs. You get the MLB rolling over on BetOnline. It's really got everything for you. It's your one-stop shop for all of your betting needs. You can use it for all your sports wagering information. They got live betting over there. They have esports if you're into that. Obviously, they're going through the NBA playoffs with player props and just all the lines that you need. Head on over to betonline.net. Right now, you can learn all about the trends and all the action. Bet online where the game starts.
So as we say, this one, again, maybe in true Nets fashion, so much questioning about Steve Nash. Is he a capable coach? Does he know how to make adjustments? Well, he showed you. He showed you when it mattered most. The final 48, he put it all on display. I have an overarching thought around this, but also in true Nets fashion, the only thing that Doug could have texted me, I knew immediately when the starting lineup came in, it goes, of course, Andre Drummond starting. Why wouldn't it be? Same exact starting five that they played the first three games with, and even just specifically around that one adjustment. He ends up not playing any significant minutes. They make the move to Nicholas Claxton. They try to run him, they end up going with Blake, but does that still end up sticking in your side that you're like, fine, you made the move, you made the adjustment. What was the first what was the 4 minutes? Like, why the 4 minutes before you make the decision?
I'll never understand it. It's baffling to me. If you knew you were gonna have a quick pull on it, he just never should have been out there. I mean, how many more minutes do they need to see that he just got? We don't need to go all the way through this, but like, because we did this the other day.
Much more
Yeah,
interesting.
no, but like, I don't know what else you needed to see. And clearly they had seen it too, because he got pulled in 4 minutes and never came back. So it wasn't new to them either, right? And so, but I don't know what they were hoping to have happen for the first 4 minutes. Okay, but whatever. They don't do that. They go to Claxton early. And go ahead. You can.
No. And this is just off of in the same vein of in-game adjustments. I think it's also all the warts come to bear here, because you say they go to Claxton and there's not, I don't care. I will shoot down anyone that tries to say, well, if only Nicholas Claxton could make his free throws. I understand he shot about as horrible a percentage as you possibly could at the free throw line, something even impressive by his standards, 1 of 11 ultimately. I get that there's points there. But that's not what Nicholas Claxton does. He still did everything that you expected him to do once you pushed him into this role. It was the wart of, we don't have something else, though. The good that Nicholas Claxton brings to the court also comes with the bad. He can't make free throws. He doesn't have a shot. And this isn't negative on it's just what he is as a player. And that again, make the adjustment. Get done with Drummond. More Claxton. Guess what? This is the price you pay for that. And I think this, among other things, tells you why you still make the adjustments for adjustment's sake, but there's a downside. There was no perfect adjustment to make here, just a better version of what you try to do.
Yeah, the Claxton move was clearly the correct one. The 1 of 11, he has a mental issue around. I'm not saying he has mental issues. I'm saying around this is shooting 1 for 11 from the line for a guy that's played basketball this long, is a 60% or 50% career free throw shooter. It just means it's in his head. That's just it. Booing is not going to help. I'll never understand that from the fans, but it was in his head. And
maybe if we tell you how bad you're doing, you'll be better.
And whatever. Yeah, it's so mad. That's another maddening thing. But it's brutal. And if this was a game 7 and he had shot 1 from 11 from the line and they had lost, it would be the entire offseason.
Of course.
And by the way, the reason we know this is because the Nets have a guy on their bench who hasn't played and decided not to play for this game, who had this exact issue last year. And it became an entire talking point for an entire offseason, ended up getting him off the team. So it only because this game wasn't as high leverage, because it was not an elimination game for Boston too. Otherwise, we'd be talking about this forever. But it's still, from just a basketball standpoint, it was clearly the right move to play Claxton. Like, outside, he was a -7 and he missed 10 free throws. Like, that's pretty hard to do. in a playoff game. It actually means everything else is going right on the court, essentially, right? Like, on both ends, it was looking good. It was just this one thing, and that thing's very important. I get it, but he just wasn't able to do it. So I thought that was still the right move. In results independent on that, around the free throws, the Claxton move they shouldn't even have wasted the 4 minutes of Drummond. It should have been 27 minutes of Claxton, right?
I'm going to try to see. I'm going to go back to in-game adjustments. So we had talked about, the argument we were having was, then what do you do next? Because Claxton still only plays 23 minutes. It turned out that Blake Griffin was that guy. Now, there's 2 parts to this. Here's a guy that gave you 18 minutes, actually ended up being a +10 in the plus minus. He did all the things that he's capable of. No points in this one, 4 assists, 3 rebounds, but he did all of the hustle stuff. It was the emotional little jolt that you needed. However, I think the warts coming to bear are 18 minutes, and I'm gonna feather it into Goran Dragic, who played 24 minutes. I just think that these guys had an expiration date on how much you could get from them.
Yeah.
And this was about, when do I go for it? When do I try to pull the trigger? And that's where I think, when we talk about Nash making some decisions in this game, being proactive around it, I also look at it and go, but this is why maybe you didn't see more of it. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have done it in game 2 and live with that result, and then tried something different in game 3 and in game 4 and on down the line. But it's so hard to see the positive returns. And I think that fans are going to say, why didn't you have Blake playing all series? Because he wasn't going to be able to. That's the bottom line on all these, on Blake specifically, and then Dragic from how much could you use him standpoint.
Yeah, I think they're a little different to me. I think the fatigue.
They are, yes. Yeah.
I think the fatigue factor was clearly a thing. Like, 18 was the absolute limit probably for Blake. It was even mentioned on the broadcast that he was totally gassed, and he was definitely just a break in case of emergency thing. Like, we had seen enough bad Blake stuff here to not really make crazy strong cases to see him. It just became what you had said before, a sort of a down chain decision, because when you at that point when you're not going to play Drummond, you have two choices. You can play Blake or Aldridge. I don't think we were going to see him, or you can just play Katie at the 5, and that's what you're going to end up doing, right? And so
And you would call for that, and I think that more of that, more frequently, more heavily would have made sense. And
super hard against this Boston team, who's huge. I get it,
yep.
but so the Blake thing is like, hey, we're out of options here, so I'm just going to throw anything here. The Dragic thing, I more agree with that one, because he seemed to be sort of part of the plan, and it was just about how much of the plan he was going to be part of, because of, can he play 32 minutes? It doesn't seem like it,
Yeah.
right? So,
you know what's still too? I'll make the argument, like maybe I would have started Dragic in this game because the consistency was there on the offensive end, and maybe there's that value there. We kept talking about the Nets didn't lead going all the way back to the first quarter of game number 3, so maybe that's an additional area of the adjustment of saying, okay, now get the best value you can out of him early, and then figure out what it means late.
yeah, so I thought they did some things here like that are mostly positive choices. Like, we said outside of the
Sorry. There was one really specific thing when it came to Dragic. A really good game for him, but I thought, again, in the for every if there is a but, if Dragic can play a really good game, you can have a chance. But in terms of the continuity piece and the understanding between these players, he had a great game. But there was I think it was mid-second quarter, the start of the third quarter. He brings the ball up the court and dribbles it to Kevin Durant on the left wing, invites the second defender over, and then gives it to Kevin Durant and scoots out of the area, leaving Kevin Durant completely bottled up by two defenders. And it's not even a big knock on Dragic, but I think that was also the piece where I go, yeah, this is what you're seeing. Like, guys are trying to figure this stuff out on the fly. There's a sequence where you see the entire other 4 players are all on the right side of it. The left wing is completely wide open. Durant is under duress, and no one really knows who's supposed to be going to create this spacing in the lane, etc. So those things came through here as well. Sorry.
Yeah, and that's not something you can really adjust out of. That's just a time on task kind of thing. Multiple times too, where Dragic and I think Patty Mills did it once. I think Dragic and Curry did it once, where they just ran to the same spot in the court, and so which is equally bad, right? Because you're just not, just for obvious reasons. So yeah, I think that stuff that's not adjustment based. That's just consequence based on how the season has gone. I will say too, in terms of adjustments, this is not a apology. We've been very critical of Nash over especially this series. So this is not apology. This is not in any way meant to be an apologist for him. I do think at some point this roster what's remaining of this roster is so limited, and there's just so many key parts that are just supposed to be there that aren't. Joe Harris and Ben Simmons being the two exact guys you needed, basically not being on the court, that trying to fill in the pieces with what was left was always going to be a pretty heavy lift. So I don't think that Nash optimized for what he had all the time, for sure. And it was going to be hard for almost anybody to optimize this roster because it's just missing too many critical pieces, that what's left is not constructed properly. And so, and it's just going to be tough.
And I tip the hat to Seth Curry. Did everything he could, right? He fired off in this game, tried to keep them in it, certainly. And to your point, when you see Curry having success in this game in a difficult defensive matchup, you automatically think about, oh, what if you also had Joe Harris for something like this? It doesn't excuse the areas where Nash has struggled, but this is probably the way to cap off this season in a lot of ways. This season is, there's a lot. There's a lot more than just going, here's the reason why Kevin Durant X, here's the reason why Kyrie Y, here's the reason why Nash this or that. It's all, let me give you 13 points why this could be good or bad. And it's going to come out in the wash, changes to the roster, and things are going to happen here in the offseason. But it's hard for me to drill down on one very clear, there's the culprit. Yeah, that's why it went wrong. So
I think that's mostly it, right? It's just not one thing. Here's the good news. Everyone, qualified good here. The good news is, for our purposes, we have so much to talk about. Like, over the course of this offseason, I will be coming at you 5 days a week still. There's plenty to talk about. We're going to talk about Nash, whether he's on the hot seat. We're going to talk about what this roster could look like. We're going to talk about who's even going to be back. There's a lot of questions here around this team. There's a lot of players that are at transitional times in their contracts, and who's going to be around? Sean Marks, you think, but you don't know. This was a pretty big failing this year. And so there's plenty of meat on this bone, believe me. So we'll be here at 5 days a week, still coming at you through the remainder of the postseason. In the meantime, make sure you like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. Had our biggest download day of the year. Biggest download day of all time on Locked On Nets today, just in time for them to get swept. So keep coming
keep
around.
Doing that. Let's try to beat those numbers, and we'll keep bringing the quality content. Don't stay on the ship with us. The Nets sank. The Locked On Nets podcast is not sinking. It is ever, the tides are rising ever higher around us.
All right, like and subscribe on wherever you listen to podcasts. Like and subscribe over on YouTube.
My friends, again, not for the podcast, but for the Brooklyn Nets, parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall say goodnight till it be morrow. Willis Shakespeare.
Oh, all right, P. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.